Shabbat Shalom. You know, there are two kinds of Jews in this world. The Jews who know how to fix things, and the Jews who know the phone numbers of the people who fix things. When it comes to home repair, I belong to the second category. My cell phone is an impressive Rolodex of repairmen. But when it comes to fixing things that are broken in this world, we Jews know from thousands of years of practice exactly how to repair the brokenness. When we are afraid and when we are lacking in direction, we Jews are taught to build. As we come this week to Parashat Terumah and read about the detailed blueprints for the construction of the Mishkan, that portable wilderness sanctuary, we are reminded that our ancestors were pyramid builders who in one generation transformed into nation builders. Our Torah takes us to a precarious and fragile moment in our people's history. With Moses lingering atop Mount Sinai, engaged in Chavruta study with God, our ancestors grew impatient, lonely, scared. They had outrun the Egyptian army thanks to the miracle of the parted waters. Before them, though, they sweated endless desert and feared countless warrior tribes. Their slave mentality doubted the possibility of an invisible God, and so they forged an idol of gold. In response to this great sin, Moses' anger caused him to shatter the tablets of law. God's response was to redirect our ancestors' need to build, to repurpose their desire to build. God tells them to build something sacred, holy, purposeful. When we are afraid and when we feel lacking in direction, we Jews are taught to build. When we experience moments of precariousness, Jewish history shows that the right response is to build. Similarly, the Jewish world today feels fragile. October 7th shattered illusions. Countries that once felt safe for Jews now feel hostile. Public discourse is often poisonous. Many Jews feel squeezed between the far right and the far left, between indifference and hostility. Two of the most important Jewish thinkers speaking about this moment are Senor and Bret, who this past May and just a couple of weeks ago, respectively, offered addresses called The State of World Jewry. Both began with the same premise. We are living through a turning point. Both Senor and Stevens rejected the comforting assumption that anti-Semitism is just misunderstanding. Both argued that history is telling us something harder. Anti-Semitism is not new. It is structural. It is recurring. It cannot be wished away. Senor argues that Jewish security has never come from the goodwill of others, but from Jewish strength, agency, and resilience. Senor emphasizes power and agency. He calls for investment in Israel, security, economic resilience, and long-term strategic thinking. Bret similarly argues that no amount of teaching our Jewish neighbors about the Holocaust, or about the startup nation, or Israel's efforts toward an ethical self-defense will prevent anti-Semitism or will allow the Jews a fair shake. Stevens argues that we should stop believing that if we just explain ourselves better, the world will love us. Stevens makes a provocative claim. He says the Jewish world has spent decades and millions upon millions of dollars fighting anti-Semitism, and yet anti-Semitism is worsening. Stevens essentially called the ADL a waste of time and money. He further argues that we should stop defining Jewish identity around being hated. If anything, people's hatred of the Jews is an indication that the Jews are doing something right in this world. Like Senor, Bret calls for a cultural renaissance. Jewish schools, Jewish learning, Jewish confidence, Jewish seriousness. Stevens' vision is what he calls the October 8th Jew. the Jew who rediscovered identity after October 7th. If Stevens is about culture, Senor is about power. If Stevens is about soul, Senor is about survival. But both say the same thing. The Jewish future will not be secured by protest alone. It will be secured by building. Stevens and Senor are great, but we should also listen to the voices of the female thinkers. Dara Horn wrote one of the most important Jewish articles of the 21st century so far, and it went mostly ignored. In her Atlantic essay, Is Holocaust Education Making Anti-Semitism Worse?, Horn challenges the way Jewish identity is often framed through catastrophe. In fact, Horn actually argues that the current state of Holocaust education makes anti-Semitism worse. She demonstrates that when Jewish life is defined primarily through suffering, we unintentionally reinforce the dynamics that fuel anti-Semitism. Instead, she calls for curiosity, teaching Jewish civilization, ideas, and difference as a living culture rather than a tragic warning. The now much maligned, but in my opinion, brilliant Jewish thinker Barry Weiss builds on Horn's argument. In her own State of the World Jewry address from 2024, Weiss claims that the fate of the Jews has always been tied to the fate of freedom itself. When liberty grows, Jewish life flourishes. When it contracts, Jewish life is threatened. In addition to building Jewish pride, Jewish knowledge, and Jewish skills, Barry Weiss thinks that Jews should build partnerships and build efforts that further the cause of freedom for everyone. Weiss develops a philosophical idea that is central to her worldview. Jews historically represent dissent. Jewish survival shows that difference is possible. Therefore, Jews often become targets in societies that demand conformity. Drawing herself upon thinkers like Dara Horn, Weiss suggests that anti-Semitism is not only about the hatred of the Jews, but fear of what Jews symbolize, the possibility of independent thought. Weiss reframes anti-Semitism not merely as prejudice, but as a struggle over freedom and pluralism. And this is where the ancient Parashat Terumah becomes astonishing today. The Israelites have just left Egypt. They're traumatized and they're vulnerable. They're surrounded by enemies. One might expect God to command armies or to command diplomacy. Instead, God says, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them. This is existential, not tactical. The deepest Jewish response to fragility is creation. Not just survival, but meaning. Not just defense, but holiness. There's a Hasidic teaching. A student once asked his Rabbi, why was the Mishkan built in the wilderness? The Rabbi replied, because if we waited for a safe place, we would never build. The Mishkan was not built because the world was secure. It was built because the world was not. 60 years ago, this congregation faced its own moment of fragility when Rabbi Morris Adler, of blessed memory, was murdered. Under the leadership of Rabbi Erwin Groner, of blessed memory, and the incredibly dedicated synagogue leadership of that time, the congregation's response was not retreat. It was to build education, community, and deeper Jewish life. Today, we live in that legacy. So what does this mean for Congregation Shaarey Zedek in 2026? What does it mean for the Jewish people in 5786? The most powerful response to anti-Semitism is not fear. It is Jewish vitality. If we worry about continuity, we invest in learning. If we worry about identity, we show up. If we worry about safety, we fight for freedom. If we worry about existential loneliness, we support our synagogue. If we worry about the future, we build. Jewish homes, Jewish schools, synagogues, Israel, text and song. This is not denial of danger. It is defiance. The Mishkan was portable because Jewish life must be rebuilt in every generation. In the wilderness, in Europe, in America, after 1966, after October 7th, and in 2026. You know, there are two kinds of Jews in the world. The Jews who know how to fix things, and the Jews who know the phone numbers of the people who fix things. When it comes to repair, home repair, I belong to the second category. But when it comes to Jewish life, though, we all belong to the first category. We know how to fix this thing because our ancestors were pyramid builders who in one generation transformed into nation builders. We do not wait for safety. We build holiness wherever we are. Stevens is right. Senor is right. Dara Horn is right. Barry Weiss is right. The Jewish future will not be secured by convincing the world to love us. It will be secured by loving Judaism so much that the world cannot ignore us. So this coming week, allow me to invite you to do one more act of Jewish building. Light candles, study Torah, support Jewish education, come to synagogue, teach a child, give tzedakah. Because when Jews build, God dwells among us. You know, this week of Parashat Terumah, we mark the yortzeit of my grandfather of blessed memory, the Holocaust survivor, Wolf Gruka. And this week of Parashat Terumah, I'm also excited to tell you that my brother and his wife welcomed a new baby, the great-grandson, another great-grandchild of Holocaust survivors, Regina and Wolf Gruka. Because when Jews build, God dwells among us. Shabbat Shalom.